Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Social Responsibility Implementation for Distributors with Dory Lanenter. Today, you are listening using your computer speaker system by default. You'll have the opportunity to submit questions to Dory by typing them into the questions pane on the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time. We will collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end. Dory is the Corporate Social Responsibility and Product Integrity Consultant for QIMA. Dory Lanenter brings his expertise in corporate social responsibility and product integrity to the Supplier Audit Programs team of QIMA, a global quality control and compliance services provider. As a certified social compliance auditor, Dory supports QIMA's North American operations, helping QIMA's clients ensure ethics and sustainability throughout their supply chains. I will now hand this over to Dory.
Thank you so much, Ida. And hello, everyone. My name is Dory Lanenter, and I work for QIMA. I've been working for QIMA for 8 years. Ida told you all you need to know about me. And so, yeah, I'm wearing a lot of hats here. So I'm from one side, I'm a social compliance auditor, but I also do account management and business development here. And I'm joining this webinar today from my home office, as you can see, in Vancouver, British Columbia, in Canada. It's a very pretty place. And I'd like to start with a few thank yous. And the first one goes to the APPA. And Ida, thank you so much for reaching out to us and working with us in the past month to get this running. I'd like to thank a few of your members that I reached out to get some feedback about what you would like to hear about. You know who you are, so thank you. And I'd like to thank everyone who's attending today or logging later through YouTube for your time. It's a privilege, it's an honor for me to speak to you, and I greatly appreciate the opportunity. Last thank you goes to the frontline workers, our nurses, our doctors, the delivery people, the grocery clerks, the people who will keep us all alive and sane in these very, very crazy times, which I hope will be behind us very soon. So, moving on to the first slide, a little bit about QIMA. QIMA is the 4th largest quality control company specializing in consumer goods globally, with, as you can see, 2,500 inspectors and auditors, 85 countries, 30 of our own offices, 6 labs, many, many inspections and audits every year. Again, we provide everything that falls under the quality control umbrella. So it could be inspections, it could be audits, which we will talk about later, it could be testing, it could be software to manage quality control programs. We serve about 8,000 clients globally. The majority of our clients are small to mid-sized business, which I assume most of you fall into the small, mid-sized business category. We consider ourselves as a small business as well. And we believe, or we operate differently than other companies and other quality control companies in the sense that we have local dedicated account managers with goal to make sure that you get value from us. We're very passionate about our clients. We're very client-centric, and really want to build a program that helps you succeed. And moving on to our agenda. And fairly quickly, we'll talk about the background of social compliance, talk about the basics, about what is social compliance, what are audits, what is the difference. We'll talk about some of the challenges that the promotional products industry in Australia is facing. We'll talk about the old vision of ethical compliance programs and about the new vision, and we'll end up with a dessert of case studies. Excellent. Let's move on. Okay, so I wanted to start with some, unfortunately, quite sobering statistics and information about the current state of human rights today. And by the way, if anyone wants to see the actual references, I'll be more than happy to share them later on through Ida. But let's start talking about the harsh realities. So modern slavery, 40 million people trapped in modern slavery. And on that sense, I can tell you that the major driver behind modern slavery today is debt bondage, which means workers are forced to stay with an employer often for many years until they pay off a large amount charged by their labor broker. And that's not just, I'm not talking about China or India or Mexico right now. I'm talking about our own backyard. These things happen everywhere, even here in Canada. I'm pretty sure it happens in Australia too. The second sobering statistic, 1 out of 10 children worldwide is in the labor force. Those numbers are staggering because it means 150 million children are in this terrible cycle. Out of those 150 million children, 70 million of them are in hazardous occupations. I just read a few weeks ago that every year, 22,000 children lose their lives in the workforce. It's mind-boggling. Really hard to even absorb this. Talking about labor violations here, the most important thing that I can say is that migrant workers are particularly vulnerable as they are often in informal employment without legal recourse to protect their rights. Also, there's a gender problem here because women are also disproportionately affected, especially in industries with predominantly female line staff, like textile and apparel. Working conditions, 1.1 million deaths every year, 2 fires a day in the textile apparel industry. Environmental violations, pollution. I'm not sure if any one of you had a chance to see that video that popped up a few days ago on the web of a villager in China opening up the tap and putting a lighter next to it, and the tap water goes into fire, bursts into fire. I've never seen anything like this. And what it means is that the groundwater in that village is polluted. And again, this is not just a China problem. This happens here in Canada. There's places that have to boil water before they can drink it. It's a human right to drink clear water. And the reason for it is we have some mining companies who are greedy and violate the law and pour their toxic chemicals into our environment. So really scary stuff. And there are other new factors that are making things even worse. We're talking about the effect of COVID-19. And what we see with COVID-19 is that a lot of people lose their jobs. A lot of people are desperate to stay employed, and that means that some employers take advantage. And really sad reality of things. A lot of companies are in survival mode, so they make employees do things that go above and beyond what's in their employment contract. Another scary effect of COVID-19 is the fact that some factories are not providing proper protective equipment to their employees, or don't train them on how to wash their hands or not touch the face or wear a protective equipment. Or another thing that I've seen, factories go offline because they don't stagger the worker shifts in a way that prevents contact between working groups. So people are in contact with each other and infect each other, and the whole factories go offline. Another problem, which it was always a problem, and is the lack of visibility. And from the statistics that I have here, only 6 to 10% of businesses say they have full visibility towards the supply chain. Most of the violations in your supply chain happens not with first-tier factories, the factories that you allegedly source from, but with second and third-tier factories. That's where it's so much more difficult to uncover workplace violations. But beyond this, almost 1/3 of companies do not even bother to analyze their supply chain. So these are fairly scary statistics. And now we will move to something a little bit more positive. We'll start talking about ethical audits. So under ethical compliance, there's a few different types of ethical audit types. I just wanted to talk about the basics, talk about the differences. And the first and most prominent one, and probably the most integral type of any social compliance program, is an ethical audit, which we will talk about in more detail in the next slide. Ethical audits in general follow either an international standard for ethical compliance or a company's standard for ethical compliance. I'll talk about this in a few minutes. Structural audits. Structural audits are performed by civil engineers. And the main purpose of structural audits is to make sure the building, the factory building itself, is safe for people to work in. And these became more prominent after all the disasters, or the biggest one in Bangladesh. And the main thing that we see here in our experience with structural audits is the fact that in places like Bangladesh or China or Pakistan or India usually have a very good, strict building code. The challenge is that it's not enforced. So for example, what happened in Bangladesh or other factory collapses or fires is the fact that in some cases they put massive laundry and dryer machines on top of the buildings or where it was not supposed to be put. Those things vibrate and tremble all year, and that weakens the building structure. So when a structural audit is done, this is what we focus on. Environmental audits look or assess how the factories dispose of their toxic materials. How do they impact their environment? And these are audits that, as opposed to a traditional audit, which we would go into a factory and focus on the factory. In these audits, we go outside of a factory. We knock on the neighborhood doors and ask the neighbors, what's happening here? And we're trying to measure the noise pollution, the water cleanliness, light pollution, anything that impacts surrounding area. And again, mentioning that video about the Chinese village water tap, this is exactly what we're trying to uncover. Sanitation audits are relatively new, and again, they started to address some of the challenges that I talked about with COVID-19. So they address how factories train their employees to safe hygiene standards. Do they provide employees and protect them with personal protective equipment? Do they stagger shifts? Do they clean high-touch areas? How do they make sure products coming out of their production lines are not interfered with COVID-19 and then sent to us here in Australia or in North America? And now we're going to talk in a little bit more detail about ethical audits. And as I mentioned earlier, as you can see at the bottom of this slide, there's many different types of global standards, SE 8000 and SMETA and M40 and ICS and SLCP and a lot of different ones. And from my perspective, I sometimes look at global standards and I look at them as competing companies, because at the end of the day, they all cover pretty much the same main pillars: hygiene, health and safety, child labor, labor practices. Labor practices is basically, for example, if a factory allows its employees to unionize. Discrimination looks at gender discrimination, looks at age discrimination, and so forth. So again, all those different standards cover the same themes. The difference between them is usually the platform, the way that the scoring is done, the way the information is laid out on a report. And there's no good or bad here. each one fits to a specific client. Sometimes your clients would ask you to specifically use one of those standards. And sometimes some of them will be better fitting for your organization than others, because if you want to start a program, some of those standards are easier to implement, some of them are more complex. But at the end of the day, there's no good or bad here. It's all on the eye of the beholder and what fits to your needs. And now I'm going to move on to talk a little bit about forces shaping ethical compliance in Australia and New Zealand. And before I do this, I wanted to share with you some of my experiences with promotional products companies, and or some of the challenges that I've been hearing from promotional products companies, especially when it comes to starting and maintaining an ethical compliance program. So the first thing that is interesting is that in your industry, in most cases, not not all the time, we're usually talking about a low cost product and a low margin rate, which means not always revenues allow you to spend money on an ethical compliance program or to start it. So a lot of the companies that I had experience with, they will try to comply with all the basic mandatory legal requirements like mandatory testing or inspections. And a lot of conversations with companies who never did ethical audits before will start when either your client, maybe it's a retailer, maybe it's a big brand that ordered some products for you, will sanction you to make sure that your supply chain is socially ethical. The minority of promotional products companies will come to us and from their own idea to start an ethical program. Some of them will do that. And again, another reason for promotional products companies to start an ethical program is because they have a quality issue. How do we fix it? Sometimes making employees happy have a very dramatic effect on quality. Some of them come to us after they've been burned. They had a PR issue. And some factory was found with child labor, for example. This reaches the news. It makes you look negative. It makes your client look negative. It could be a nightmare. But yeah, these are the kind of notions that I've experienced in the past few years. It's getting better and better. The awareness of the need to make sure the supply chain is clean is getting better. We'll talk about the old visions and the new visions very soon. And I see a lot of companies succeeding not only with implementing social compliance programs, but they are very good, especially in your industry. They're very good marketers, and they promoting their good corporate social responsibility habits with the world, and people look at this favorably, and they get new business as a result because your clients love it, and the end users love it. So it's a win-win. And again, at the end of the day, if you get to the point that you improve the lives of the workers in a factory, you get better products. It's tested. And one last thing, I mean, a lot of companies don't know how to start. It's kind of, you know, it could be scary. There's a lot of information that you need to absorb. But I can tell you that companies like us and other companies in our space can help you navigate. So I'm not just promoting ourselves. Companies in our space, third-party quality control companies, can help you navigate those waters. And it's fairly simple to implement it. Now to the actual forces shaping your industry. So and I've got some statistics here. We'll talk about this later. So the main force shaping the industry right now in Australia, probably affecting New Zealand as well, is the Australian Modern Slavery Act, which was commenced in January 2019. And this act targets companies who are making $100 million plus every year in revenues, and requires them for three different components. The first one, it's asking those companies to identify the risks of modern slavery practices in their operations and supply chain. It's asking them to describe the actions the company is taking to assess and address these risks. And then thirdly, it asks them to assess how the company is reviewing the effectiveness of those corrective action measures. So that's about the Australian Modern Slavery Act, again, targeting companies which make $100 million or more. Another big force in this world right now is Baptist world, which is more relevant, I would say, to textile and apparel industry. And the main theme that comes out of Baptist world is trying to make supply chain information public, as it's considered a first step in the right direction for companies new to labor rights management. So again, making information about supply chain visible and public. We talked about how public relations or bad public relations or good public relations can affect companies to go into the space or start an ethical compliance program. And the last force, which is not on this slide, but we already talked about, is COVID-19. COVID-19 is pushing a lot of supply chains to the limit. A lot of factories are firing people. A lot of factories are taking advantage of the fact that people are desperate for work, especially in third world countries. And again, that's affecting the fact that people work extra hours. We don't get enough training on how to maintain social distancing. They don't get enough personal protective equipment to make sure that they protect themselves and their workers. So there's a big implication here on health and safety. The old vision of ethical audits. So the old vision was and is a very, very one-sided approach. And within that approach, it was comply or die. I pay you money. I don't want to, if this should be a turnkey solution, you, Mr. Factory, you're in charge of everything. I want great products, and I want you to have a wonderful ethical compliance program. I don't want to hear about any wrongdoing. And of course, this was, again, very one-sided, and all the emphasis and responsibility is put on the factory. There's no support, there's no partnership, there's no communication. And there's no alignment of goals, and the result it's almost impossible to reach sustainable solutions like this. There's no genuine commitment from both sides. This approach was very, very prevalent when I started working from Kima 8 years ago. It's still there, but it's changing rapidly as more and more companies understand that this is not a sustainable way to manage your supply chain. And moving to the new vision, which is a complete opposite of obviously complete opposite of the old vision. And the first, and it's comprised of three components. Like every good thing has to have three parts. And the first one is transparency. And companies started asking themselves, what do I want to achieve from an ethical compliance program? What is realistic? What is important for me? And then cooperation, which all goes to communication. How do I communicate my expectations to the factory? Again, talking about a partnership, about cooperation. These are very, very strong words, but they have to be meaningful. We have to change. A lot of companies are changing their mindset in that regards. In order to achieve results, you have to be a partner. You can't just expect things to happen. And the last component is continuous improvement. And I always like to say, those kinds of programs, the ethical compliance programs, are a never-ending continuous improvement. It's a never-ending conversation that has to be followed up. It can be just an ended cycle. It has to be a straight line. So again, it's a never-ending type of conversation and dialogue with your supply chain. And talking about the first component, transparency, when we start working with clients who are getting into the ethical compliance world, or starting to think or plan on creating a program, there's a few questions that I always ask, and you should ask yourself. So, in the first one is, do you have a code of conduct? A code of conduct is your public values and expectation. What does your organization stand for? Do you have a documented social responsibility program? How do you monitor it? How do you communicate with the factories? Tell me a little bit about your relationship with the factory. How does it work? How do you audit your factories, or do you even audit your factories? What is your approach to risk? Which is very interesting as well, because the approach to risk will help you focus on what you would like to achieve, because some companies, some promotional products companies, have a very wide approach to risk. They would decide that they are going to examine their entire supply chain, first, second, third tier suppliers across the board. Some companies don't have a budget to audit 100 factories. So they would employ a risk-based approach, identifying the biggest offenders. So for example, I have 100 factories in my supply chain, but I know about 7 which are riskier based on previous information that I have. And those 7 factories, these are the ones we're going to focus our program on. And the last point here, transparency goes both ways. It's so true. When you're transparent with your supply chain, with your factories, with your factory managers, they will be transparent with you. And it works. Talking about defining, again, these are just ideas of how to define your expectations. So how do you define critical problems? So for some companies, that will be bribery, that will be fake documents, it could be denied access, but for some companies, it might be child labor, it could be forced labor. What are your zero tolerance issues? So again, defining what matters to you. And then the ethical audit program. So the audits are very important, but they're not everything. There's other tools that you can use to implement an ethical compliance program. We'll talk about this later. And this slide talks about the third component of the new vision. Again, we were talking about the continuous improvement, this never-ending type of dialogue with your supply chain. And again, this is also comprised of 3 components. And the first one is engaging and measuring. So vetting the factories, analyzing data, getting real analytics that support your decision-making. And then correcting and educating. As I mentioned, audits are not everything. There are other tools that you can use, like factory improvement process. And a factory improvement, as opposed to an audit, the auditor will go to the factory, observe, report back to you with a corrective action plan, highlighting all the risks that he or she observed. A factory improvement will be above and beyond. It's like a hand-holding type of project in which the specialists will go to the factory to work hand in hand with the factory management, identifying root cause issues, putting together corrective action plans, and implementing them together, coaching the factory how to maintain this into the future. So it's a more of a consulting, hand-holding type of support. And of course, limiting factories that do not bother to work with you. At the end of the day, again, cooperation and transparency and partnership. It has to be reciprocal, not just you or not just the factory. It has to be both sides. And then again, talking about a never-ending cycle. There's going to be a re-audit in 12 months or 18 months, depending on how much you want the audit shelf life to be, depending on the severity of the findings in the initial audit. Next slide, talking a little bit of how to take a corrective action plan and maintain it. And I probably haven't mentioned this, but a corrective action plan is a component in the audit report that basically lists all of the non-compliances, minor, major non-compliances. It also includes how to fix it, and a description on how to fix it, and it is also time-oriented. So not only we know what the issues are and how to fix them, there's a deadline to fix each of those issues. So beyond reviewing the corrective action plan, we can assign responsible people. So people in your promotional product company that are responsible for following up on this. Obviously, people at the factory, that they are the ones that can actually implement the corrective action. It's going to be timed. So, for example, minor non-compliances, for example, insufficient documentation could be a minor non-compliance. This should be resolved within 30 days. Child labor, that's a major non-compliance. You've got 3 weeks to have it fixed. So everything is actionable and time-oriented. Training can be provided to factories, and technical consulting and training can be provided to factories that don't have the capacity to implement the corrective action. We all know that when we work in a company for many years, we develop a tunnel vision. The same goes for factories. Sometimes there's a problem of capacity. We know what the problem is, that they don't have the tools to fix it. So there are outside sources that can provide technical consulting and training. And at the end of it, there's a certificate that is, again, limited by time. It's good for 12 months. After 12 months, it's going to be, the cycle starts again. Now this slide, I didn't know if I wanted to add it because it comes from a more advanced webinar that I did, but I still decided to bring it because it just, it's almost like a blueprint of how to implement a program. It looks complex, but it's not really. So the first component, again, 3 parts, it's beautiful. The first component is the kickoff stage. So basically, we bring all the factories together under the same table to communicate the program, to communicate needs, to communicate expectations. We start auditing the suppliers. We agree on a time frame for completion. And at the end, the factories that pass get a 12 months certificate. The factories who are at risk or need improvement move on to the second stage. Again, time oriented. We need to finish this within 3 to 6 months. And this can change based on your individual program. So again, take action to implement this. And again, the ones that pass get a 12 months certificate. The ones that don't move on to the third stage, which is a more heightened stage of training and education for the ones that are willing to work with you. The ones that are not are going to be vetted out of your supply chain. So again, just to demonstrate how to easily build a program. And again, it's not very complex. It might sound, but it's not like this. And again, it's easy to navigate it with the use of companies out there, but that's their expertise. And moving to case studies. So that's our dessert. Yes, I've got I've got a few of them here. So the first case study is an electronics factory in China. And this factory was a part of a summit of factories that our client initiated. There were 15 factories. We all brought them to a hotel to talk about the program, talk about the expectations, talk about the stages of the problem, what to expect, how to communicate fully the goals. And this specific supplier came to our instructor and said, and we realized that they were not bought into the idea. They perceived this as an additional cost. It's all on them to fix it. And the solution was communicating. Again, the factory, despite what they thought, was not alone in this. The client chipped in with some funds to arrange training. We basically took the time to sit together and explain why is this meaningful to you and to your client. And once this factory was bought into the idea and implemented the program, we saw a drastic reduction in workforce turnover because workers were happier. It's very simple, and it's a model factory, and they're getting a lot more business now because it's a good factory. And sometimes it's hard for them to see the long-term effect of this kind of investment, which again is not just their investment. It's a 2 or 3 parties are involved in that. Second study case, and that's really interesting because you'll see those kinds of scenarios happen more and more today. So these are 2 factories in Taiwan. And in countries like Taiwan and Japan, Thailand, Malaysia, you'll see more and more situations where the workers are not local. The workers are from Bangladesh and from Vietnam and from Sri Lanka and from India. And that always creates a conflict because these are 2 different cultures. And in this specific case, we identified that there was no recreation areas for those migrant workers, which is, by the way, a violation of international law. Recreation areas are important. And the rest breaks were not officially structured. So either people were not getting any rest breaks, or there was just no system to make it official. And those very 2 simple things were implemented. I mean, there's a very, very small investment that the factory made on creating a recreation area with internet connection, with some newspapers, some hot water machine, really like a very minute investment. We officially structured the rest breaks, and the result was almost immediate. The products coming out of the production lines were better. The inspections that we did showed a dramatic improvement in the quality of the product. So again, happy workers means happy products. Case study 3, I was involved in this one myself, a very disturbing case. So usually, not usually, but anytime an audit is conducted, the auditor is supposed to randomly choose workers, 10 to 20 workers, depending on the size of a factory, to one-on-one individual interviews. In those interviews, the workers feel comfortable to tell what's bothering them, to share any information that can help us gather data about what's happening with whether there are any violations. And the interesting story here is that the workers did not share anything unusual with us during the one-on-one interviews. But we know that because sometimes people don't feel comfortable speaking out when they're at the factory. I've seen cases where the factory manager is popping out of the office door window. That can intimidate people. But what we do is that at the end of those audits, we give the auditor's business card to the interviewees. And in this case, a female worker called the other late in the evening that day and told them that the factory is asking new hires and all other women to take periodical pregnancy tests, which is a massive violation of gender discrimination. And that was fairly simple. The client was very, very angry when they heard about this and asked the factory manager. This was, by the way, a long-term partnership with this factory. They used to work for like almost 10 years together. Major supplier. The factory manager refused, and the client walked the talk, and they stopped their business. Again, in some cases, unfortunately, don't end up in cooperation. Study case number 4, and I'm pretty sure all of you are reading the news about what's happening in northeastern China. There's a very big Muslim minority they called Uyghurs. So we've heard stories about concentration camps. We've heard stories about re-education and so forth. But for sure, there's now a program which is mandated by the Chinese government, which is meant to reintegrate those individuals into society. And they're sending a lot of workers all the way from northeastern China to the main production areas in China and over the coast to work in factories. And we're very, very sensitive to this. So anytime one of our auditors is at the factory in China, we look out for those people. They are ethnically different than Han Chinese. So it's very easy to identify them. And when we do, we automatically shortlist them for the one-on-one interviews because we're very concerned about what's happening there. We want to make sure ourselves and our clients know if there are Uyghur workers in the factory and how their working conditions look like. And in this case, yes, they were underpaid. They were discriminated against local Chinese people or Han Chinese. And that was fixed. Our client, I mean, that was one of the things that had to be done. The client asked the factory to have their conditions matched with everyone else, and the factory did it, and they kept their business. Still, not a great situation to be in. There's no winners here. There's no losers, but at least some good was done in the sense that those migrant workers or minority workers get the same conditions. There's a 5th study case that I haven't put in here, but we have some time, and I want to talk about it because it's actually something that I was involved with as well. Very proud of it. What was maybe 5 years ago, a factory in Cambodia. It was, I believe it was a toy manufacturer. Right when we got into the factory gate, we noticed children working. There were close to 12 kids between the ages of 8 to 10. Child labor, it's a big no-no. But before we, the old vision of ethical audits, when you find something like this, you either stop it, or if the factories do not want to cooperate, you cut your business relationship with them. But what was also uncovered when we interviewed those children is that they begged the auditor not to report it because if they lose a job, their families go hungry. And we brought all this to our client's attention. And that's a very, very tough decision to make. There's no good outcome here. But the client was very forward thinking. And again, very much the new vision of ethical audits, decided to do something else. They invested some money. So instead of letting those children go, the factory kept them as workers. We negotiated a lower amount of hours that they work, and our client brought a tutor 5 days a week to teach English and math and free meals a day. So again, at the end of the day, the factory still maintained child labor. It's horrible. We don't want this. But again, they found a solution which was better than some families going hungry. Sometimes you just have to be creative. this way and try to do some good rather than go by the book. So yeah, that's almost completes it. I'm just going to remind you of some of the main things that we talked about: transparency, cooperation, communication. Audits are not everything. They're just one important tool, but again, there's other things that can be done to improve the factories, improve the supply chain, so training, factory improvement, and so forth. And most important thing in this summary, I would say, again, good ethical compliance programs are simple to build and simple to implement. And they need to be a part of not just your company's culture. It should be a part of the factory, the supply chain culture, and so for everyone should be bought into the idea. Which is sometimes challenging. And on that note, I wanted to thank you so much for your time today. I hope these 30 minutes were interesting and meaningful. And feel free to engage with us for any question, for anything down the road, any kind of guidance that you need or support. We would love to help. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dory, for this fantastic presentation.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Now, to kickstart our Q&A session, our first question is, which countries have the highest social compliance risk?
It's a good question. So obviously, still most of the manufacturing today is done in China. So China is big on that. India, Cambodia, these are probably the main countries to pay attention to. Usually the matrix is that the poorer a country is, that's where you would see more and more social compliance issues. Bangladesh is also a country that has higher than usual ethical compliance issues.
Thank you for that. Our next one is, what is the global ethical audit standard most commonly used by companies in Australia and New Zealand?
So I'm just going to track back to one of the first few slides. Yeah, here we go. So SMETA or SEDEX is the most commonly used type of global standard in Australia and New Zealand. And after that, we would see SA 8000 as the second most popular type of audit scheme that is used. Again, these are, again, they both cover the same main themes, just different type of reporting, different type of displaying results. And I know that, for example, SMETA is sometimes popular within your clients, the brands, the retailers, the companies that order promotional products for you. So, yeah, that's good.
Thank you for answering that. We have another question that's come through, which is, my factory in China is currently under COVID lockdown and would not accept auditors. Is there a way to still support them?
It's a good question as well, and that's something which we see a lot. A lot of regions in China and other countries in everywhere else are locked down. They would not accept people who are not from the same city or from the same province. And for that, companies like us and others in the quality control industry created what we call a guided or a remote type of audit or inspection, in which basically we take over the factory's smartphone camera, and a senior auditor or an inspector guides the factory worker through the checklist of the social audit or the inspection, achieving the same result almost. It's not as good as being there, but again, when you have to have a third party document what's happening, that is a tool that is now used in many cases. Again, it's called a remote or a guided audit. And again, the main difference is that a senior auditor, senior inspector goes through the same checklist, but operating the factory workers remotely to get this information.
That's great. And lastly, another COVID-related question. Is there a solution to review the factory's cleanliness and COVID-19 crisis management plan?
Yes, we talked about this earlier. We're talking about sanitation audits, and that's exactly the purpose of these audits. The main purpose is to make sure the factory is training their employees correctly to protect themselves, that the factories are providing their workers personal protective equipment, that the factories are managing production lines in a way that is staggering shifts to make sure workers don't infect each other, that high touch areas are cleaned, and so forth. So that's so that is the main thing that is now supporting this kind of challenge.
Thank you for that. That seemed to be the last question that had come through. But if you do have any questions for Dory that come to mind after the presentation, please send them through to dory.lanenter@kima.com. I will also include that email address as part of the follow-up email you will receive over the coming days, which will also include a copy of the recording. On behalf of Dory Lanenter and APPA, thank you for all our participants in joining us today, and I hope you have a great afternoon, and thank you once again, Dory.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Thank you.